Just for a little housekeeping, welcome everybody. We know your time is valuable and we appreciate you spending some of your Thursday night with us. Just to give you kind of a brief introduction, and I think some of you have had the pleasure of working with Denise on grant review thus far. While ANCs are not required to issue grants, many do and many prefer to, and it often becomes one of the more confusing or time-consuming parts of a commission's activities. And so rather than include the grants as part of our annual officer training, we decided to remove it and create its own session and open it up to all commissioners, just so that you can all hear the same thing. We know many of you have questions, some of you have been former officers, and some of you may have experiences that you'd like to share. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Denise. For logistics, I will be monitoring and admitting people. So Denise, you don't have to worry about that. And I will also be paying attention to the meeting chat. So if there are any questions in there as you're going through the meeting, I'll make sure that you get those. And with that, I turn it over to you.
Okay, just a couple things. You got some materials with the invite, but I'll be sending them again to everybody who attended tonight. There'll be page numbers referenced in the presentation, and that's, whoops, yes, that's referring to your pocket guide. The code sections are in your pocket guide. And there were approximately 5 documents sent with that are necessary for grants or direct expenditures. Form 100, the grant application, Form 105 for direct expenditures where you make the statement of the public purpose. This slideshow, the ANC application for grants, which also includes the closeout form, and the new policy on reviewing grants that have a food component. And well, I'm not going to be muting anyone. I would ask that questions about food wait till we get to reviewing the section on food. And with that, let me start the slideshow. There are 2 ways. The DC code authorizes ANCs to make public purpose expenditures, and there's 2 ways to do it, either by a grant or a direct expenditure. Grants are made by the ANC to an organization which will spend the money on the public purpose. So grants are made by the ANC to an organization, and it has to be an organization, it can't be an individual, which will spend the money on the public purpose. Direct expenditures are things that the ANC makes directly for a public purpose, such as, I know one ANC buys the flowers directly from the vendor for the public planting that occurs in their neighborhood. Or if you're having a public event, you may pay the vendor directly instead of going through the organizer. Both have the same requirements, but there's a few restrictions on direct expenditures. A direct expenditure, well, this is a repeat. Applicants for grants must fill out the Form 100 and file a copy with the ANC and the OANC. The OANC, we review them, but only to determine if it meets the code requirements for expenditures. The ANC is best determined as to whether to award the grant. Does it meet the goals of your ANC, your budget, and those sorts of things? At the end, a closeout form is filled out by the applicant, which is then filed with your QFR. A public purpose is defined as a purpose that includes a significant benefit for the community and is not done for the primary purpose of benefiting a private entity. So a grant application from a nonprofit organization that wants you to help them rebuild their website or buy equipment for the organization, even if that organization serves the public, that particular expenditure would benefit the organization, not the public. A grant may not be awarded unless it's pursuant to an ANC vote at a public meeting, and many follow a public presentation by the grant recipient. That's up to the ANC. A commission may only approve grants to organizations that are public in nature, and that is not defined in the code. and benefit persons who reside or work within the commission area. The services provided by the grantee organization must not duplicate anything provided by the district government or already performed by the district government.
Is the general counsel.
Denise, we have one question already about the direct expenditure on slide 2. Perhaps, unless you address it more deeply later on.
Okay, what's the question? I can't actually see it.
Yeah, it was from Commissioner Dunson. Commissioner, if you could unmute and ask the question directly.
Hi, Denise, thank you. No, you had two blocks. One was on the grant, and then in the time, I wasn't able to digest the one about the direct expenditures because it seemed like it was saying something different than what the grants part was saying. And I just wanted to make sure I understood the distinction between the direct expenditures.
Yeah, grants are done by application to the ANC by an organization, and the money is given to the organization who then spends it on the benefit, public benefit, whether it be a festival, block party, or whatever. The ANC would directly write the check to purchase the supplies, such as flowers for a public planting or renting a booth at a festival. And the difference also is in the paperwork. The grant would have the grant application and a closeout form filed by the applicant. And direct expenditures, you would have your check and Form 105, which is a statement of public purpose.
Okay, thank you.
And grants then would be awarded. Grants and direct expenditures both need a vote because they're an expenditure at a public meeting of the ANC. Again, grants are only made to organizations which are public in purpose, and the services provided should not be duplicate of anything the DC government already provides. If the DC government has suspended, and like in the 90s, they suspended bulk trash collection or no longer provides the service, the ANC can provide it, but you would need a statement from the agency that is not something they fund, that's not in their budget, and it can't be in their legislative mandate, whether they've discontinued the service or not. The example I have there is where an ANC paid to paint the auditorium at their local school. Well, the auditorium was on the painting schedule for DGS, although it wasn't going to be painted for 5 years, and the community didn't want to wait 5 years, but it was considered duplicative because it was planned and projected and was required for DGS to do it. The DC code sets out the requirements for the expenditure, the application, and what's to be reported with the quarterly financial report. And it's not just the event that must comply, it's the actual expenditure of the money. A public purpose is a purpose that has a significant benefit to the community. It has to benefit the people who live and work in the commission area and not done for the primary purpose of benefiting a private entity. Services, as I said, must not be duplicative of those are already performed by the district government. And in the case of a grant, it must be to an organization. No commission shall provide a grant for which a grantee estimates the overhead cost would exceed 15% of the grant amount. And the expense itself must be permissible in nature. Now, there are restrictions on direct expenditures. ANCs cannot make direct expenditures for public purpose on food or entertainment. The food is restricted by the DC code, and entertainment is restricted by federal procurement regulations. Now, in both cases, the grantee may spend money on, in some cases, foods, which we have a new protocol for reviewing grants that have a food component, and entertainment. The public purpose benefit has changed for those of you who've been commissioners for a while. Before last summer, July 8th to be exact, it had to benefit the community as a whole. This made it somewhat restrictive on ANCs. Multiple ANCs couldn't support a grant because you could only support one community as a whole. And now with a significant benefit, you can have ANCs that's more than one ANC support if, like say at the Old Soldiers Home, they have film fests and community festivals every year, and they border 3 ANCs. Attendance highly comes from two of those ANCs for the most part. So two ANCs could support that project. Significant benefit would be something public like plantings, a festival, a work of art that residents can take part in and enjoy in. The significant part, the recipient group can't be very small, like 8 to 10 residents. For example, a class that was going to only serve 10 students once a semester was not significant enough for the community. But a larger class, say one at a farmer's market, where multiple people could attend and multiple people in the ANC have access to, would be a public significant benefit to the public. There can be a limit. For example, you can have something that maybe can only serve 100 people, like a block party or a seed packet giveaway. As long as it's made, everybody has an equal opportunity to access the benefit before it runs out. Examples of public purpose, and these are grants that have been made. Halloween parties with candy, movie nights, flower plantings. One ANC does this every year as a direct benefit and puts it in its budget every year because they know they're going to do it. Uniforms or sports equipment for a team that can be used year to year, so would not be personalized uniforms, but uniforms without names. Festival supports such as the MLK Day Parade, Columbia Heights, Christmas tree lightings, Day of the Dead. And permissible things for festivals include table and chair rentals, stage rental, other equipment rentals, bounce houses, foam generators. But t-shirts and food that is specific only for the volunteers and is not as open to the community is considered a benefit, a private benefit that is not permissible. Grants often go to parent-teacher organizations, and they have recently supplied for robotics challenges, science kits for an entire grade that's used year to year, an outdoor learning space that's going to be used for year to year, the equipment for the outdoor learning space, things that benefit a large swath of students from the ANC. Now, the school doesn't actually have to be in the ANC if a significant number of your residents attend the school. The library support organizations, for example, one library had a kind of courtyard space that was fenced off. They decided to open that for an outdoor reading area, and the ANC supported it by supplying money for equipment to purchase for that space. And the library also gave a statement that that was something not in their budget and was not anticipated to ever be in their budget. A heritage event in Southeast where they did genealogy research and assisted people in doing genealogy research, and they also had a wider symposium with it. As I mentioned, a farmer's market food education classes where they were at the market and they did food education and also taught food preparation in a series of classes. And one ANC did a distribution of seed packets for Earth Day. Now, there weren't enough seed packets for everybody in the ANC, but there were a significant number that until they ran out, people in the community could get them. You know, in some ways, I think the benefits for those who live and work in the ANC is self-explanatory, but it doesn't mean the event has to happen within the ANC. It just has to be within close proximity so the residents would be able to participate, or through the PTO of a school where a significant number of students attend. There was recently an event at the Mexican Cultural Institute supported by an ANC, one ANC, but it was actually across the street from another ANC that if the applicant had widely advertised in the other ANC, they could have asked that ANC also for support. There should be no charge for attendance. It should be open to everybody in the public. And it should be specific to the ANC. There was recently a citywide tenant event that multiple ANCs supported. It was at the MLK Library, but say ANCs on the Maryland border supported it, but there was not a sufficient nexus to their ANC or even a way for the residents of their ANC to get to the event. For example, we would consider transportation for residents of the ANC to that event permissible, but supporting the rent of the event in MLK when there was no plan of how it would benefit the residents of that ANC directly was not considered permissible. It cannot be done to benefit a private entity. And examples of these would be computers or website redesigned to a nonprofit, expenses for clothing and school supplies and coat drives. The actual supplies and coat drives, the coats, would not be considered permissible because those are benefiting particular individuals. Support for the event, such as table, chair, rental, or entertainment provisions, would have been permissible as a grant to the organization. And the other is if it benefits a tiny number of people, it's not considered a benefit to the community. It's more of a private benefit. Services not duplicating those already performed by the district. It's considered a duplication if DC has budgeted the item or is required by statute to do it. I mentioned the school auditorium, but the same thing happens. There's certain, like when ANC wants to repair a mural that's in a district park, they need to figure out that the district park is not going to budget, DPR is not going to budget for replacement of the mural pieces. It was originally funded by a arts grant. However, they are doing some repairs to the facility done by the arts grant. The question is whether they're going to purchase the specialized replacement tiles. Sorry, as I said, services that are no longer provided by the district or suspended by the district are allowed. Now, in one case, the district supplies tools through the Helping Hands program at DPW for neighborhood cleanups, but those are only 9 months of the year. Sorry, I had a little math issue there. They don't provide it 3 months of the year. So a couple ANCs have asked if they could purchase, and these were direct purchases, the tools so that their residents could do these cleanups in the off months. And that was considered permissible because DPW will never be providing those tools or the support that's required in those off months. The support must be to an organization. It doesn't have to be an incorporated organization, but it must be public in nature, meaning usually not a business or for-profit entity. Now, organizations without bank accounts, such as some cleanup groups or planting groups or block parties, would need a fiscal sponsor. Main streets, district bridges, nonprofits, and some businesses, usually for block parties, have served as fiscal sponsors, and that's all acceptable. So the idea is that we're not writing checks to individuals who may or may not be accountable to where the money is going. And some ANCs, and this is an ANC requirement, it's not a code requirement. Some ANCs have set out that they will only give to 501c3s. It does limit the organizations you can give to, but they're more comfortable doing it that way. There's also a few ANCs that have some formal grant guidelines, like how much they'll give out for block parties or how much they'll give out for different types of events. And a few have grant cycles that they only accept grants at certain times of the year. No, the money the ANC provides to a grant can't be more than 15% of it cannot be spent on overhead. And overhead, as we define it for purposes of grants, is indirect costs, such as ones the organization would incur anyway, a portion of their staff salary, office expenses, Wi-Fi, sometimes insurance. Now, a lot of times applicants confuse the cost of the event for overhead, so we carefully review the budget that's supplied with the grant application, because most of the time there isn't anything that we or the code would consider overhead as part of the grant application. Now, the actual expenditure by the ANC or the grant application must be a permissible expense as outlined in the DC code or the Red Book, which is formally called the Principles of Federal Appropriations Law. The DC code restricts when ANCs can spend food, only $100 at ANC meetings. And the red book is the one that restricts ANCs from spending on entertainment. And the advice we've been given through Office of Contracting and Procurement and the OAG is all money that the district has is considered a federal appropriation because we have to go through the federal appropriations process. And so even local monies are subject to the federal appropriations restrictions. And there are some things that are also specifically impermissible per the DC code or federal restrictions. Travel outside the Washington metropolitan area is not permissible. We see this with Little League, like recently, Little League team was invited to the playoffs in Florida. The ANC could not support that for them, though we did discuss them supporting the team in other ways, like buying equipment or something. Expenses that benefit individuals. This includes t-shirts, meals, backpacks, coats, other clothing, and meals to volunteers at events. Enhancement to private property or the public parking. As many of you know, in the older parts of the city, everybody's front yard is considered public parking, which is part of the district right-of-way. However, per the DC and federal code, it's under the exclusive use of the adjacent homeowner. So flower plantings that include the public space, the public parking that's adjacent to a private property would not count if it's public parking adjacent to a district park or other district-owned lands you could plant there. And direct expenditures by an ANC on food or entertainment. Permissible expenditures or entertainment for large groups by a grantee, such as movie rental, movie night, bounce houses, foam generators. We see those a lot at block parties. Flowers and bulbs for neighborhood plantings, supplies for workshops, such as a Calvin Coolidge Alumni Association is having a large health fair where all the district agencies are coming. And a lot of non-district agencies where there'll be medical testing and things. They're putting together packets for workshops and to distribute to the attendees. That would be permissible as an education tool. Table, chair, and equipment rental. Again, I've mentioned it several times, uniforms. Porta potties, a farmer's market food education class, and in certain circumstances, food. And some of you are saying food, this is a big change. We recently modified the policy for grant reviews when food expenditures are part of the grant request. The OAG has also modified its position based on guidance in the Red Book and a change in the DC law. This policy was attached on the website and the link to this seminar, but I'll also be sending it to you after the meeting. Now, grants still have to meet all the other requirements for a grant, which is why direct food aid isn't permissible, because it's not part of a community event. It's not part of a large community benefit. It's considered direct aid to a person. I know there's some disagreement on this, but I think that's the right place for right now, unless the council makes a change to the code. The factors we look at in evaluating grants that have a food component is the primary significant expense of the grant for food given to individuals. In this case, like food aid, it would be a primary beneficiary to an individual. Is the ANC money primarily being used to purchase food or to support non-food supplies such as table and chairs rentals? Is the grant being used for a full sit-down meal? Is it open to everyone in the ANC? For example, in the event where candy may be distributed or chicken wings given out available to anybody in the community? Or is it limited to a particular population, such as volunteers, or a geography, such as a block party only for persons on the block? If you're having an event where any member of the ANC could attend, such as a Halloween film thing where you're giving out popcorn and candy until it runs out, that would be permissible. And that means there doesn't have to be enough for everybody, just that everybody has an equal access to it. And one of the things we look at, can the food be severed from the event and it still happen? Well, a lot of things can happen without the food, but the food makes it better and might bring more people in. So the food would be permissible. There was recently a big community cleanup and a community day, and they were going to be grilling hot dogs and hamburgers and giving them out to the people who attended and assisted. Now, everybody in the ANC had the opportunity to come and get a hot dog or a hamburger, and so that was considered permissible. And is there a compelling argument that the food improves the grant objective? If your objective is to bring people together to say, have the neighbors know each other, which helps reduce crime or helps produce community harmony, and you're going to give out a little candy, popcorn, hot dogs, chicken wings, then food would be permissible. Okay, any questions?
Thanks, Denise. Just a question that I'll come off mute here, Commissioner Christian in 4B02. Just the question would be about the materials that were mentioned earlier. I didn't see those in the Zoom invite that I received. I think you said you'll send the materials as a follow-up, but just wanted to confirm.
Yes, everybody here tonight, I'll go ahead and send an email because the slideshow changed slightly since the invite anyway. So if you were able to find it, there's a couple slides I fine-tuned a little bit. So yeah, I'll take the log of everybody and send the materials out. So there should be 5 things, including the new policy on reviewing grants with a food component. Oh, plantings can be on DPR or DDOT public space if it's not something DPR does. Most of the flowers and things you see in Department of Parks and Recreation parks are actually done by the volunteer organization associated with the DPR site. And the same with the pocket parks, all those little pocket parks in the district, almost all of those plantings are done by volunteers. And so, yes, the only difference, yeah, so it just doesn't have to, it just can't be private space.
Denise, I see 3 hands raised. I
Okay.
apologize, I didn't see the order in which they went up, but the commissioners are Sobelson, Prince, and Dunson.
Okay, well, since under my screen, Mr. Silverson's on the left, I'll take him.
Thank you. I do have a question about block parties and food. My block has a block party every year and usually provides food. And the block party is on the block, but we don't like exclude people because they don't live on the block. Anybody who wants to attend can attend. And so my question is, under what circumstances could the ANC provide funds that would at least in part go to that food?
The circumstances that the block party isn't restrictive to the block. It may, in those cases, the ANC usually puts it out in, the commissioners put it out in their SMD newsletters so that other people know, but it just, it has to be open and available to other people in the ANC. The same as before, when you had a block party, a lot of ANCs had set aside, a limit for $500 for block parties, and that would go to a bounce house rental or foam rental and that sort of thing. I would also, just an aside, recommend that if an ANC is putting money towards a bounce house rental, especially if they're paying for it directly, that you get a certificate, a letter of insurance from the Office of Risk Management. That can be done through their portal on the same day. And if everybody needs it, when come time to need it, you won't remember where you need to get it from, just email me and I'll send you the link.
Is there a problem based on the percentage of the grant that would go for food? So for instance, if the people who organize my block party ask for $100 grant and it's all going for food, is that a problem?
I guess the question is what is the proportion of the food? For example, I recently saw one where a block party asked for $3,200 to have a food truck cater it. And they would only have food for like 80 people. That was probably a little extreme. I mean, we're still working through this. So a lot of it depends. We'll look at the budget of because we ask when a grant application sends a grant in that we get the budget for the entire event. What proportion of the budget is the food. If the food's the majority of the block party budget, that would be problematic because you're starting to look at sit-down meals and benefits to a small number of people. There's usually other expenses that are non-food that are related to a block party, so you would take all that into account. I know this is a little vague, but we've just started this and we're working through it. Like I said, we just did a grant and we consulted with one of the council members who helped author the legislation about the community day where they were going to have tables and chairs and pass out hot dogs and hamburgers. That's very similar to a block party, except it was a block party where the whole community was notably invited. And it was in a central location in the ANC where lots of people would be able to see it. So a lot of it has to do is how open is it? How restrictive is the attendance? How restrictive is the food? And is the food going to be the majority of the budget?
What's the timetable? If this block party is in September, when should we be moving the process along?
Well, you need to vote. The ANC needs to vote. This is another grant restriction, actually, which I now realize wasn't in there. An ANC has to approve the event before it occurs. So you need to make sure you vote at it at least the month before the event's going to occur. In terms of our office reviewing them, we turn around almost all grant applications in less than a week, unless we're waiting on materials from the grant applicant. Now, another thing to consider is when you approve things too early and write the check, it's going to cross quarterly financial reports. So you'll have a check in one quarter and the closeout form in another, and the closeout form and the receipts coming in another, which may present a delay. So for example, if the event's in September, you'll want to vote on it in July or August, because by the time you file that quarter financial report, you'll have the receipts from the September event to file with your quarterly financial report. And on that same tangent, some schools and some others have applied for things that are semester-wide or cross 2 or 3 quarters. And in those cases, I've suggested when they know that the expenses are going to be split up over a long period of time, to maybe write 2 checks, one for each quarter, and that way you'll have the receipts that go with each quarter.
Commissioners Dunson and Prince. Which one would you prefer to start with?
Mr. Prince is now on my left, so I'll go with him.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. I actually have 3 questions. One is there a maximum, a ceiling for grants? The second one is about citywide versus ANC, and I'm thinking about the 3 museums that I have in my single member district. If I were to make a grant to one of those museums, might there be a difficulty distinguishing a citywide benefit from an ANC only benefit if it were at their usual premises, unless they, if they did a road show within the ANC, that'd be a little different. The third question is, could you talk about whether there are any monitoring, reporting, and closeout requirements? Thank you.
Yeah, there is no ceiling. It's the ANC's budget, and there have been a few $10,000 grants. Most grants by ANCs are between, for events and larger things, are between $2,000 and $5,000. Really, most grants are between $2,000 and $2,500 that I see. Block parties have traditionally been $500, but this year that amount seems to be creeping up a lot. So no, there's no upward limit. But again, the ANC needs to be, you have a fiduciary responsibility. And for those ANCs that have large bank balances that they want to spend down, you should consider maybe a couple-year plan to spend it down and not try to spend it down all in one year. Just to leave future ANCs some of that bank balance. But again, that's up to you to decide. A flat grant to a museum not tied to any particular exhibit is problematic in and of itself, because there is no nexus to the ANC. And it also, a flat grant like that would be contributing probably to the operating expenses of the museum. which equates to a private benefit. Now, if the museum has a special exhibit that would focus, dang it, there was one that just came to mind. They were going to have a special exhibit, and it was going to focus on some history of that particular ANC. That grant was considered permissible, and they were also going to do a lot of specific outreach to the ANC to bring in community members. Now, yes, other members of the public would benefit from that, but just a generalized grant to a museum is problematic, because then you're looking at, does it go to the operating expenses and the overhead of the museum, as opposed to some specific benefit for the ANC. So I can see that particularized exhibits or particularized events, like say the museum wants to have an open house for the local community, that would be a permissible event. And and in terms of monitoring, once you write the check, it's going to be, that check will be part of your quarterly financial report. In terms, well, let me back up. In terms of the ANC monitoring, you write the check. The grant is required to be, if you use our application form, we have written into it that the grant is required to be spent on what the organization states it will spend the money on. And if they don't, they're required to refund it. Previously, when that wasn't specific in the grant applications, the OAG had issued an advisory letter saying the ANC had no right to get the money back. Now, in terms of our office monitoring it, once you write the check, we look for the check, the grant application, the receipts, and the closeout form. We look at the receipts to make sure they match what was in the budget of the grant application and were spent on what they were supposed to be and the event they were supposed to be spent on. And the closeout form is a statement, an affirmation by the grant application, by the grant applicant, as to how they spend the money and affirming that they spent it in the way it was intended. We had a grant last fall, and that is, I think, one of the only grantees that's prohibited right now from receiving grants. They received money for an event that was supposed to happen in August. They didn't hold an event till October. It was a totally different type of event. I mean, they could have delayed the event for reasons and gotten permission from the ANC. And they also didn't spend the money on anything that was related to the application. They were requested to refund the money and they didn't. And so they have been barred from receiving any ANC grants in the future. Commissioner Dunson.
Well, before we go on to Commissioner Dunson, I do want to add one thing to Commissioner Prince, because he said he did not have a generalized grant in mind. And so I think to help clarify that, sometimes there will be citywide or even ward-wide events that may actually have a hyper local community neighborhood focus. And that would be the focus that would be applicable to be funded through the ANC. So for instance, I can think of one thing that now where there's a private organization that's working with the DC government, but the DC government is not funding their effort, but they're going to be doing 5 case studies of 5 different neighborhoods related to the neighborhood history. And one could make a really good argument that there's a public purpose, that this is something that's valuable to the entire commission area. And therefore, there would be certain aspects of that effort that would be fundable. If it's a local exhibition and it has a focus on your commission area that would be of particular benefit to your commission area, that would likely be fundable. What's really important, and probably repeating Denise here, but the expenditure of funds for public purpose have to have a clearly defined public purpose. You are in many ways the experts of what that benefit is to your community. And, we ask that you work with the applicants to clearly state what that benefit is to your community. Due to a recent change in the law, your community doesn't have to be the primary beneficiary, but there does have to be a significant benefit to your community. One of the challenges we've had in the past is there have been some really good programs that, from our position, likely had components that were fundable, but neither the applicant nor the commission could give us anything more specific than, well, this is of great benefit to my ward. Well, wards are a little bit larger than commissions, and wards are frequently made up of five or more commissions. And so what we ask you to do is help us by defining what the benefit is to your commission area, because that's what the law requires. And being overly broad and trying to sell it that this is why it's really important and should be funded actually undermines your efforts to get it approved. So I just wanted to add that. Now that I've spoken on a bit, I believe Commissioner Dunson has had her hand up for a while, so I thank you for your patience.
Oh, no, that's fine. Thank you. I had a few questions just now listening to you. One, for the closeout, you talked about, for the closeout, do the receipts, does the awarding of the grant, giving them the grant, and then the closeout need to happen in the same quarter?
No, they just need to happen reasonably close enough that, no, they don't have to. And in fact, the way the code is written is that if they don't spend, that they give you a report in 60 days and then every 90 days thereafter. So the code anticipates a grant being over a long period of time. I'm just being a little pragmatic.
Okay.
For QFRs, it can sometimes present problems. So you might want to split up checks if it's going to be over a 9-month period of time.
Okay.
Because it may hold up part of your allotment till those receipts come in. And as long as they come in the same fiscal year, when they cross fiscal years by 2 months, you could have a problem.
So for our reporting and our allotment, if something does cross the quarter, would that hold up our allotment until then there's a closeout report in the next quarter?
No, well, when you think about your quarter that closes December 31st, the filing isn't required till February 15th. And then honestly, they're not instantly reviewed in our office because we have 46 to go through. So then there's some time to get the receipts. And if the receipts are missing, Ms. Dickerson will email you and say, I need these receipts, or this is what I need. So there is some flexibility built into it. But if there's going to be a 6-month difference between the writing of the check and the receipts, then there may be a delay.
Okay.
So and I try now when I see that there's going to be something, like if an ANC is voting on it way in advance, or the project is going to be over a long period of time, I usually put that in the memo and in the email saying that I noticed this and you may want to consider, these things to make it just easier for the QFR. Okay.
And for the review, we are updating our 5C review. We now are asking them to whoever submits a project idea or proposal to submit it to us first, and then we look at it, then we submit it to you. Is that so then can we do that, or does it need to go to your office first?
It's not at first. The code says it's supposed to be simultaneously.
Okay.
And I don't mind reviewing a grant that you may not ever see or vote on.
Okay.
And again, I'm only reviewing them as to whether the expenses are permissible, not
right.
It's a great project. Like recently we got a grant request, and this is an extreme, but it was $50,000 to build out or to buy something for a restaurant in the community. It was just easier. I could email them back and say, this doesn't meet the code. Here's some resources for small businesses. And the ANC never even had to take it up. If something flat out violates the code like that, or unfortunately for the Little League teams, the ANC doesn't want to be the bad person to say, we can't fund this. But I don't mind reviewing them. I know a few ANCs have found it, didn't like it when I reviewed it before they looked at it because they weren't going to take it up. Like there was an ANC opposed to funding anything with charter schools. But I don't know that when I'm reviewing them, and it gives you a chance. I can also work with the applicant and say, like I did today, we got a great application in, but the money was going to salaries. I saw that he had the exact same amount in something that was permissible. And I said, would you mind just changing the line of what the ANC grant is going to support? And he did that. And at least from our perspective, the grant was then totally permissible, and the ANC could vote it up or down or partially, however they wanted when they
Okay.
were here, without concern of something happening in the QFR review.
So I understand the process. It goes simultaneously, and then you actually are giving like some technical assistance to the applicant. But that does not mean that we are approving it. It just means that you're validating the expenses then. And so then therefore it still comes back to when we can decide, are we going to support it in whole or in part or not at all?
Right. We're not reviewing it for whether the ANC should or should not.
Okay.
And I try to make that clear to applicants that I'm reviewing it for permissibility, that it still has to go to the ANC for a vote. So
Okay.
and when I usually include the applicant on the final email, and in it, I say, I have reviewed this for permissibility. It is or isn't permissible should the ANC decide to vote on it, to vote to support it.
Yeah.
To make it clear that it's the ANC's the final vote. And I also point out, though I don't recommend it, an ANC can fund something that's not permissible. As long as it's not illegal. Like occasionally ANCs, one ANC in particular did not agree with our position, and they had the money to lose. They wanted to fund this event. They funded it, even though they knew that it wasn't considered permissible, and they lost the money in their next quarterly.
Yeah, we wouldn't do that. That doesn't make sense. Okay. But I want to just, for this thing, we actually had a pretty contentious issue that we had an individual had a project, and so now a requirement is that anyone who's proposing a project complete the grant application, because on your form, I believe it's number 8, it says, are you a group or are you an individual? So if an individual submits a project, will you still review?
I would review it to the point where if I saw it was an individual, and then I would probably write them and say, it's an input. Payments cannot go to individuals, that they must go to an organization. If they can find a nonprofit or something that's willing to sponsor this project, then if it's that kind of project, I would recommend them looking for a sponsor.
Okay, and then you would copy us on that as well?
Yeah.
Because what we're trying to discourage is people getting a commissioner, getting them to sponsor it directly, but then some people go through the process of putting in a grant application. So if anyone who proposes something, it comes in, we're all looking at it at the same time. So that was the thinking. And so then therefore the entire commission has seen it versus one person saying this and the commission takes it on. We want to just, that if you're not one of the commissioners, we want you to go through the public application process, because so that the same process exists for anyone that's not a commissioner proposing something for community benefit, whether they're an individual organization. And in that way, the direct expenditures that come from the commission, we then make the decision. So that was the idea. And that was kind of contentious in our region. But the decision was that we know everyone needs to come through the same process.
Right, and a check to an individual that is not staff or support to the ANC, not a contractor, would raise a big red flag in the QFR process. You would be asked for the contract for whatever it is they did, and if they're not a contractor and it was some other kind of expenditure, that would be a problem.
Right, and that's the thing, we want, because we're having an issue with the ideas and how they come in, like, I'm gonna tell Commissioner Conica to fund this, so to make it simple and to circumvent the grant process, she's gonna just champion the charge directly. Whereas another organization, they come through the grant application, have a stricter level of review, and may not have the commissioner who immediately champions it directly for them. So in our introduction of any idea for an individual or an organization, we said everyone must complete the same form. And then we look at it to say, are you an individual? Then this is what we can do and this is what we cannot do. We're not writing checks to any individuals. We can decide, go get a fiscal sponsor, or maybe this will be a project of the commission.
Right.
Okay, so I just
Yep.
wanted to check because it was quite a contentious discussion. I know you're getting short on time. I had additional questions, but I see someone else is here because this was supposed to end at 8 o'clock.
Well, and actually, I think I had it open-ended, but
Oh, okay. Well, I'll let the other person go, but I have some other questions. My last question was the overhead. Is it permissible for someone to just build in 15% overhead into their grant proposal?
no, well, they're gonna, if they do, they have to submit the receipts for it.
Okay,
You
for
can't,
whatever, right.
you
Yeah.
can't just say I have 15% overhead without there actually being the receipts to go with it.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Commissioner Nunez?
Hi, this was very, very helpful, thank you. We've been trying to get some applicants for our, for ANC Wendy's grants, and we didn't have any for this quarter, and so we were soliciting them, so now what I have is like a handful of ideas from folks, but I'm not sure if they're permissible or not, and I want to kind of guide them in the right direction before they submit applications. So I hope it's just edifying for people to hear the back and forth a bit, but yeah, just looking for advice. So, and so there's 3 examples and they're all a bit different. So one of them was an organization that is a local organization that is trying to, they're interested in advocating for, or I guess they're interested in, I think, commissioning somebody to conduct an analysis on housing in Mount Pleasant. And the goal is to be able to help the neighborhood organize its advocacy ahead of like the 2050 input period. And so I think that they're looking for, something like commissioning or paying like a student fellow, or like hiring someone to like do some kind of data analysis or outreach. And I
That
talked
runs
about-
the
yeah.
risk of duplicating resources by the DC
Mm.
government. And that was what I would have to, if I
Yeah.
saw it, I would look into, because the Office of Planning or may have that information already.
Okay. So would it be helpful if we can get a little bit more detail from them on the kind of thing that they're trying to study? Would it make sense to reach out? Like, would it be helpful to reach out to the Office of Planning and try to square away what they're planning on studying versus not? Because I think that what they're looking for is something really hyper local to Mount Pleasant. Like they're like trying to look into the census tracts and like try to like just really stare at, which the Office of Planning might not be doing.
No, the Office of Planning might not be doing,
Uh-huh.
and then the question is, does the Office of Planning have that information through the census?
Oh, I
Bureau?
see.
Because the census,
Okay.
so the Office of Planning may not have that information, but they would aggregate that information that they receive through the annual mini census, mini
Mhm.
censi, the individual censuses that are covered each year. So that's the big thing I see with that. Is it a duplication of something the DC government already does? Now, if they can figure out whether they do or don't do it, that would be useful. Honestly, I would probably, unless you can get a statement from the Office of Planning saying, we do not have that information and we do not intend to find that information, I would still probably check. When I reviewed the grant, would still check behind it.
Okay, so it sounds like the advice is, and I think that they're a pretty active group, so I think that they might even have their own relationships with OP, but it sounds like just encouraging them to work directly with OP, knowing that it might run into duplication of services to the extent that they can for like the next few weeks.
Right.
Okay, and then the second example was another local group that was hoping to organize, I think they had a lot of ideas, but the idea that I think that they were most interested in was a wellness, like a community-wide wellness event, modeled after something that that I think that Alexandria did, where they had in the neighborhood like multiple stations with multiple workout classes, educational workshops, screenings, this kind of thing. And she was trying to understand like what within that event she could look to the ANC for money versus elsewhere. And I know like tables and chairs and things, but she wondered if we would be able to cover the costs for the instructors specifically.
If the instructors were not being paid as individuals, if the instructors were coming through an organization. And again, with these wellness events, you have to look at, is this something you can get? Certain types like the exercise instructors, you're not going to be able to get through the DC government, but the Department of Health and there's some other agencies, they come out and provide free services at wellness events. So if it's a free service, like the one that I just said the name of
So if it's
the
like
Calvin Coolidge Health Fair event, the alumni health fair event, it was going to be a mix of private and public agencies.
Okay.
So like there's an organization that I just saw a grant for glasses for children, so there's certain things. So if it's not something the DC government provides, then, and the event will be open to everybody in the ANC, which sounds like it would be, then yes, you can pay for the things that would not be duplicative. But the caveat there is we don't like to see checks written to individuals. So if there was a health center or something like that, that the checks could be written to, like a exercise, if you're hiring exercise instructors.
Okay, because I think a lot of the instructors are sort of like freelance instructors, and so that would not be advised. It would be like better to find somebody associated with a group
or an organization.
Or
Like, I was going to say what used to be in the basement of the Argyle, they had a health center, there. A lot of the local instructors worked through them, even though they were freelance. The check could have been made to them, and then they get paid from that organization.
Okay, and then the last one, like I said, these three were very different. So the last one was somebody who was hoping to plan like a series of events that would offer free food in the neighborhood. And so she was less interested in like funding assistance for the events and more interested in funding for a banner for the events. Like it's like the events seemed to fit a public, so if assuming the events fit a public purpose, I wasn't sure if we would be allowed to, she was like wondering if we could commission a local artist to paint the banner. And I wasn't sure.
And I guess, is the banner, okay, this is kind of a quirky one. Is the banner going to be a one-time use banner? And if it's going to be a very artsy banner, who owns it at the end?
Yeah, it is a quirky one. Maybe I'll just say it if anyone thinks it's fine. It's the Mount Pleasant Perpetual Stew group that did a day. They were there every day. They had
I just heard about them.
Yeah, they had free food available for whoever wanted to come every day at noon at a publicly accessible plaza. And they were hoping to just not formalize a bit, but to do that again with different kinds of food. And so it would be an organization, I guess, whatever organization they decide to become would. But I guess what I'm hearing is, actually, no, could you restate it? Like,
the problem is it's a thing that you're purchasing that would then, the ownership would go to the organization. So signage for events that's for that event only, posters, marketing materials, is considered acceptable. But something that would be a perpetual ownership, a thing of value that's given to the organization that they would use. Now, if it was for Mount Pleasant Stew Fest with a particular date range, that would probably be permissible, but not just plain Mount Pleasant Stew Fest that they could use in perpetuity. I mean, it is contrary to how we believe that we shouldn't be buying disposable things, but that's why, these quirky things have evolved in the grants that you can rent tents, even though it costs more to rent tents than for the organization to buy pop-up tents. Because there is no benefit going to a private entity. And so that's how I would look at this banner. So if the banner had a date limit in it, yes. If the banner didn't have a date limit and was meant to last for years and years, then a no.
If it was meant to last for years and years, but we slapped an ANC 1D website QR code to our next meeting page, like, would that?
If the ANC maintained ownership of the banner.
Oh, I see.
So if the ANC maintained ownership of the banner, then you're looking at meeting notice. That actually is more of an office expense. That's another thing. A number of ANCs were putting their name and their logo on events and calling that a public benefit. If you put your name and your logo and your meeting dates and times or meeting information, it then is a meeting note, goes under your meeting notice as an operating expense.
But at that point, it becomes more if they would be okay with us owning the banner and lending it to them versus, okay, this is very helpful. Okay,
Well,
thank you.
In a similar vein, Denise said it seems counterintuitive, but that's why grant applicants can rent tents, but not purchase the tents. But if the ANC had an office that was large enough, the ANC could actually purchase a tent and then loan that tent out to anyone in the community that needed it, because you would retain ownership. I know that becomes a management issue, and I also know that a lot of commissions don't have that kind of space.
Oh, I'm sorry. I see Commissioner Christian, is your hand up? I see your hand looks different than everybody else's hand. Oh, I'm sorry. That was my hand.
Oh, back to me. Yes, I have additional questions. So can we share this as resources? Like this PowerPoint was very helpful. Is that something we could post on our website?
You can, and you can share anything I send you.
Okay.
So I might want to add that part about the meeting voting in advance to the slides.
Okay, so we can post this on the website. The other question was, we have our public calendar that our last meeting is in June, and then we don't come back again until September. But we have potentially people who want to have events in September. So we don't have the public meeting to vote. Can we call a special meeting to then vote? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the rules for special meetings, all it is if it's a non-regular meeting, you can call an additional regular meeting if you wanted, or you could call a special meeting. But for a special meeting where you're giving less than 7 days notice, the only things you can address in the meeting are the things in the agenda posted in advance. But say you want to call a special meeting 2 weeks in advance, you could do that.
Okay. And the last question, let's see. And the other thing was, what is this letter of insurance? Who needs to get that? The organization or the ANC? For like Fort Lincoln Day, if we had a moon bounce or whatever.
I was just noticing that in a particular case, an ANC was going to do a direct expense and pay for the moon bounce directly. And because the moon bounce was going to be in their name, I suggested they get the letter of insurance. If you're contributing to Fort Lincoln Day, whoever the organization organizing it, then I wouldn't worry about the letter of insurance.
Okay.
But by the way, you can get letters sorry, my lights just went on. You can get letters of insurance for ANC offices or ANC events also. So if the ANC is having an event and wants to rent a space for it, and the landlord says, but I need a letter of insurance, you can get a letter of insurance for that purpose also.
Okay. That's all. Yeah, that's all I have.
So I was just going to say, it looks like we've reached the end. So Denise.
You all have a good evening.
This is really helpful.
And feel
Thank
free to
you.
email with questions, whatever. And we also do review direct expenditures. If you have a question whether or not the ANC can directly spend money on something. It's easier to shoot an email than angst over it or find out later it wasn't permissible.
Well, and I would say too, is if you're working with a community group and they're in the early stages of pulling together a grant application, but they're not sure if it's fundable. If they have a budget, the budget is really important and it's something we're going to need. But if they have a budget that they could send along, I think we would be happy to look at that as well, because we're going to have to look at it anyway. And that might save some additional work for all involved before they get too far along. So I would just say, consider us a resource. Denise and I are always here, and Denise does a really good job of turning things around. And there's, I think it was covered earlier, but just to make clear, we have been reviewing these as they've been submitted because we believe it makes it easier for the commission to decide what's fundable, what's not fundable. It takes some effort off of your plate. And if an unfortunate event, if it's something that's not fundable and we take the heat for it, I would rather have us be in that position than the commission. So.
Me too.
Yeah, it was really hard to say no to the Little League team, but we did.
Well, but I will also say too, whenever we look at grants, we review them with the position of trying to find ways to say yes rather than trying to find ways to say no. Like that's how we're wired. So yeah, sometimes it guts us when we get to a no, because that's not what we want to do. There's lots of really great programs in the city, but they don't all align with how the laws are written.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. This is
Thank
great.
you.
Bye.